I am Laura Moral, and I'm here in representation of the National Geographic Institute of Spain, as I work in its historical aerial archive. I hope that this presentation helps you to get to know us better and how we do things. And the title is A Mission Over Time, Preserving and Disseminating Historical Aerial Images guided by the National Geographic Institute of Spain. I have structured the presentation in several points. I'm going to start with the introduction, presenting IGN, and after that I'm going to give you some information about our aerial surveys, the preservation of historical aerial photography, archiving data and metadata, the processing of historical aerial photography, and the dissemination. I'm going to finish with our major prospects, and you will be able to ask me anything. So let's begin with the introduction, the National Geographic Institute of Spain. Since our inception, we have been responsible for observing, measuring, and collecting information about space and land. All this work leads to a series of services and products that the National Geographic Information Center makes available to citizens, from viewers, download center, virtual store, and map houses. And our goal is to offer you a portrait of the Spanish territory of the highest precision, with official character, high quality, and updated. So now you know who are we. I'm going to give you information about our aerial surveys, which can be historical or can belong to the Aerial Orthophotography National Plan, which is called PNOA. So aerial surveys achieved by IGN date from 1930s onwards and covers all or a part of the territory, and most of them are commissioned by IGN, although a few were transferred from other organizations. And currently we have over 1.7 million photographs, more or less 67% of digital photos and other 17% of analog photos, which are archived and served by IGN. So you have them available in our viewer and download center. We have another 11% which are archived but not served because we have not still digitized them. And we have to mention that we have an extra 5% which we not archived but we serve, but them are not, it's not possible to be certified or download these images. So in relation to our historical aerial surveys, we have carried out research works, documentation, labeling, reorganization, cataloging, and conservation tests. And these are their main characteristics. We have several photo mediums, for example, films, glass plates, or transparencies. And the scale goes from 5,000 to 70,000. We have also different formats, including roll, and the forward and side overlaps tend to be 60 and 30. In this slide, I have tried to summarize our Aerial Orthophotography National Plan. Its main objective is the generation of ortho images of the Spanish territory with an upgrading period of 3 years, and it is a collaborative production between different administrations, in accordance with the inspired directive spirit, that is to establish an spatial data infrastructure in Europe. So the spatial resolution has increased since the origin of the project in 2004, and I have to emphasize that we have intermediate products that are the aerial photographs and related information, which are really important for our department. And here you can see our workflow. We follow all these steps to publish a historical aerial photography. So first we do the conservation and archiving and the digitalization. And after that we register the data and register our metadata in our database. After that we make connection from our web map service and viewer to our database and between themselves, and we make that the users can access through the viewer to our virtual store and download center. You will see all these steps in the following slides. And I'm going to start with the preservation. I'm going to talk about our archive status and the process of digitization. Both are really important, not only for the preservation, but also for efficiently managing aerial surveys. We have also provided training in conservation to our personnel and established manipulation protocols in order to prevent the degradation of the originals. So in a simplified manner, we can say that improving archive status plus digitization projects plus other measures like training in conservation and manipulation protocols is equal to the preservation of historical aerial photography. Okay, and here you have some images that symbolize our evolution. You have the before and after of the renovation of our storage space, and we have here the plan and the storage system. We also have controllers for the temperature and humidity, but we have still work to do. Other measure in which we invest is the digitization. So, this is especially important because it minimizes the original's manipulation, especially as the photos remains in our center during the process. We have here the numbers. Over 355,000 aerial photos have already been digitized. 61% more or less of the total, but as I've said before, we have work to do. This is one of our future projects that we are going to digitize over 37,000 photos of historical aerial flights of the 30s to 50s. Okay, and moving on, I'm going to talk about archiving data and metadata. In relation to data, we have digital photographs that are saved in two formats, GeoTIFF or compressed formats like COG. GeoTIFF files are archived in hard drive disks, and there are 3 copies because we want to save maintain the data safety. And the compressed formats are saved in hard disks too, and in data servers. And I have to mention that nowadays we are generating COG images to be published and downloaded, since the benefits of this format has been proven. Okay, and turning rapidly to archiving metadata, we have designed and created this PostGIS database. We have the aim of inventory aerial photographs be used as data source for our WMS and viewer, and be consulted by our personnel to enhance the personalized attention. We import metadata and geometries in 2 levels. The first one is aerial survey information, and the second one photographs information. And here you have the main tables of our database. There is more of them, but this is a general example. We have tables with the first level of information, and tables with that contains information of photographs. Okay, and continuing with orthoimage generation, we have historical PENOA. That is a project that was launched in 2008 for generating historical ortho images. And nowadays, IGN, in collaboration with other public bodies, have available these flights. We also have a future production that are some of these flights too, but only for a little region that is called Comunidad Valenciana. Okay, and this is one of the most important parts of our presentation, because we think that this is really important in our job too, and is the dissemination of aerial photography. We have several channels of distribution, and one of them is our WMS, which complies with the standard of the Open Geospatial Consortium and was created with MapServer. And in addition, it meets the requirements of the INSPIRE directive. I have to underline that it is a query WMS that makes connections to our PostGIS database and not only represent the registered geometries, but also is also available to consult information. And these aerial photographs also can be visualized, adding advantages as superposition and transparency. Here you have some examples of the main operations. The get capability operation have a response that is a document in XML with the main characteristics of the service and the data. And we have the get map operation that give us a response that it could be the geometries or the photos. Okay, I think that we cannot see them, but okay. And the third operation is giving us information of a certain photograph and flight. Well, this is the response, sorry. Okay, continuing. Another channel of dissemination is our viewer, and it is developed from AFN-ICCD, which is a common core technology based on OpenLayer 6, and it is interactive viewer that stands out for its functionalities. For example, the certificate of imagery or the visualization. And it also has spatial and alphanumeric queries implemented to consult the analogous surveys that are not still digitized. This is also possible because of the connections that it makes to our WMS, our database, and other GeoJSON files that we exclusively generate. Okay, and moving on to the topic of certification, a transcendental advantage of aerial photography in comparison with ortho images is that can be certified, as non-alteration is guaranteed and the date of photo taking has been registered. So this is a service that often is requested for legal issues. And I have here to mention and highlight that IGN products are open and free, and we only charge for the certification and printing services. And you have two ways to get a certified aerial photograph: in our virtual shops, where users come from the viewer, and with a personalized attention by email or in person. And nowadays, according with our statistics, our users prefer the personalized attention because it provides more choice for customers. Okay, the last channel of distribution could be our download center. This is its appearance, and if you want to download aerial photos, you can do it from our viewer. But for ortho images, you need our download center. To finish, these are our statistics. Last year we had almost 1 million of downloads, and we have. Here you have the percentage in terms of product. We have here ortho images, and on the left photographs. We have divided in historical and PNOA. And to conclude, our major prospects, which are also our key challenges and opportunities. There are five of them. The first one is the creation of a REST service to offer the orientation parameters. The second one is the promote of the Federation of Public Bodies that guard historical aerial photographs in Spain. we also want to improve the preservation of the original and continuing with the dissemination. And we want to increase the investment in orthophotography generation, which is difficult for us, but we try to. And I have only one thing left to say, that is thank you for your attention. Here you have my email, our website, and I have to point out that we have social media. So if you want to ask me anything, thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. I'll speak very quickly because we haven't got very much time. So I'm going to provide an introduction to the work of NCAP in the UK. So as a kind of quick breakdown of what the presentation will be, I'll give an introduction, I'll outline the evolution of NCAP and the imagery that we hold, outline our core activities, our live partnerships, and then questions at the end. So in terms of where we are, we're based now in Edinburgh in Scotland. So for those that don't know where Edinburgh is, that's just a slide showing it. So NCAP's one of the largest and most significant collections of historic aerial imagery in the world. We are the official custodian of UK government declassified aerial photography, so most of what we hold is military declassified records, and currently we have over 30 million high-resolution analogue images with an ongoing declassification programme that will add millions more. So most of the image that we hold is classed as UK government public record, so we hold that under the provisions of the Public Records Act. The archive is still actually largely owned by the Ministry of Defence, and the National Archives in London are responsible for ensuring that the archive is preserved and it's publicly accessible. But although we don't own it, we are just the custodians of the archive. The MOD own it. The National Archives has to ensure that we do everything correctly. Neither gives us any money. So we've had a very long history of having to be financially self-sufficient. So our mission, as we see it, is to work with existing stakeholders and partners and develop new relationships where we need to achieve the vision of becoming the centre of excellence and the standard setter for custodianship and the online dissemination of aerial photography. And throughout this presentation you'll see a few historic images. The image on the screen is a small corner of the print library at the Allies' headquarters of photographic intelligence during the Second World War. So in terms of the image that we hold, I'll just introduce the key groups of records that we have. So it is mostly military declassified photography, and that's from before the Second World War, the Second World War, Cold War and post-Cold War. We also have government commissioned air survey photography and a large amount of commercial air survey photography as well. So the very earliest photography that we actually hold is from the 1920s, and it's hard to believe, but we're actually currently in the process of accessioning lots of photography from the 1920s, which has literally been discovered in the back of a government store, and this all relates to large parts of the Middle East and the Far East. So all of the photography that was actually used to delineate country boundaries has been discovered. So that's, for us, quite an interesting project that we're doing right now. Also, we're getting, at the moment, lots more photography from the end of the Cold War as well. The time has come for it to be declassified, so the archive keeps growing. And as I mentioned earlier, we also hold government-commissioned air survey photography and commercial photography. So that's an example of some of the 1920s photography. In this instance, it's recording Hong Kong in 1924. But as I said, we're currently getting more photography of Aden, Transjordan, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Iraq, Libya, Malta, Saudi Arabia and Somaliland. The vast bulk of the military declassified photography that we hold comes from the Second World War, so over 10 of the 30 million images are from the Second World War. Of those, 5.5 million of them are held as photographic prints only. So that in the case where we have a print, we don't have a film copy, and the remainder of the imagery is held in roll film format. So I mentioned earlier about the Allies' Centre of Photographic Intelligence during the Second World War, and this is where that centre was. This is Danesfield House, about 30 miles west of central London. It's a strange name, it's called RAF Station Medmenham, but this was the centre where many academics especially were recruited to create what was known as a very unorthodox inter-service intelligence unit. People were recruited for their brain power, first and foremost, so it was an unusual intelligence unit. At RAF Medmenham, the process of how you analyse aerial photography was evolved, building on work done in the First World War, and there were 3 phases of interpretation. First phase was when imagery was analysed very quickly to identify urgent tactical information. Second phase was usually carried out within the following 24-48 hours. And third phase was where intelligence work was undertaken over time. So you had all 3 phases of interpretation happening to elucidate the most intelligence as possible. And this is one team, this is the second phase team standing on the steps of RAF Medmenham. Most of what we hold is stereoscopic, so I don't need to explain that to this audience. It's also comparative cover in the archives, so we do have repeat photography of the same places all throughout the Second World War, and here we just have an example of Cologne through the war years. And also in the archive, key moments of world history as they happened. So here we have Gold Beach on the 6th of June as the Allies were literally landing on the beaches. But also things like the Holocaust. So here we have Auschwitz-Birkenau. This was an image that was only discovered in the early 21st century in the archive. And this was created by 60 squadrons. That was the South African Air Force, just kind of reflecting the fact that it was an inter-allied effort. The significance of this image is that it records Auschwitz-Birkenau in August 1944 during the massacre of the Hungarian Jews. So also Second World War, we have throughout the Second World War we have the Central Europe. We also have the Mediterranean theatre. So there was one collection known as MEPRW, Mediterranean Allied Photo Reconnaissance Wing, and this was the photography that was created in North Africa and then based in San Severo in Italy throughout the Mediterranean theatre. So we have a collection of 150,000 MEPRW images, and also ICCD has rather a lot of MEPRW photography as well, which you'll see if you go on the tour of the archive. But we also have Middle East, Near East and Far East theatres. This is Tehran in October 1942, and you can spot the Union Jack flag in the image. And beyond the Second World War, we also have Cold War imagery. But before that, at the very end of the Second World War, it was a race between the British, the Americans and the Russians to capture the aerial photography created by the German Luftwaffe. So the British captured 1.5 million images, which we hold now in the archive. These were known as, or are known as GX, G for Germany, X for secret. So we have 1.5 million images, and the Americans have 1.2 million images from the Germans. We also have a thing called Project Casey Jones, and that was where it was an Anglo-American project at the end of the Second World War to photograph Iceland, Europe and North Africa, and you can see pretty much everywhere apart from Scandinavia seems to be covered by that programme. This was a huge effort to create the first series of post-war maps, and that's roughly 1 to 50,000 scale imagery of the continent. So the problem that the Air Ministry had at the end of the war was they had this stately home, they had tens of millions of aerial photographs. The Air Ministry, it's a recurring theme here, but the Air Ministry didn't want to spend any money on the archive, so they wanted to find somebody that would take on the archive as a national library of aerial photography. Plans were drawn up, and they exist at the National Archives in London. Unfortunately, the Cold War came along too quickly, and on the basis the best customers would be Russian agents, it wasn't possible to open the library. So the photography stayed behind at RAF Medmenham for decades. So because Many of the photographic interpreters that worked at Mebnum were academics. They went back to their respective universities after the war. And probably the most active of the academics was a man called Professor Stanley Beaver. He was a professor of geography and went to the University of Kiel in Staffordshire, so in between Manchester and Birmingham. And because he was the most troublesome, I suppose, for the Air Ministry academic, he ultimately was given 5.5 million photographs in 1962, and he ultimately described it as a bittersweet victory. All of this happened because of a thing called Project SegMed, which was to segregate the archive that was left in the stately home. And if the photography covered the Soviet Union or Eastern Europe, that was prized intelligence in the Cold War, so that was retained by the MOD. Photography of Western Europe, 5.5 million images were given to the professor, and all the rest went to Battersea Power Station, where they were burnt. So actually years ago I managed to track down some of the RAF personnel that actually drove trucks for over a year and a half every single day to Battersea, and they vividly remembered throwing sackloads of film into the furnaces. So Professor Stanley Beaver, he was tenacious. He did save 5.5 million photographs. The problem for him was that he was given 40,000 boxes of prints. He was given hundreds of thousands of sheets of plotting, nothing that linked the two together, and a security caveat meant that nobody could look at the photography until each embassy said it was okay. So it practically meant you had an unusable archive. And it essentially took decades of student labour to actually create an index for the catalogue, and that was the same card index system when I first worked in the archive. And yet again, it's another stately home in the English countryside that was home for the archive. So beyond the Second World War, between 2004 and 2008, there was a large declassification project. So when I first worked in the archive, we only had 5.5 million images. But in 4 years, the archive grew by over 20 million images, and that was more imagery from the Second World War and the Cold War. And we'd always been told, don't expect much more from the Second World War, and easily have got at least another 5 million images from the Second World War, plus the Cold War up to 1989. So that does record wherever the British had foreign policy interests, and also the interests of Five Eyes and NATO as well. So just as an example, this is again reflecting the fact that it's a NATO resource. This is oblique photography flown by the French Air Force, which has survived in the collection. So here we have Port Said during the Suez Crisis in 1956, with a Johnny Walker whisky advert to be seen. So in terms of wrapping up what we hold, beyond 1989, we're now starting to receive the last of the film archives that exist within the Ministry of Defence. So we, like I said, have this rolling declassification programme that will go on for a number of years, and then thereafter everything is digital. So beyond military, it's okay. So beyond military photography, we also hold millions of frames where the government has commissioned air survey photography. The best example is a collection called DOS, Directorate of Overseas Surveys. And this is a collection where, inspired by the work during the Second World War of what aerial photography could do, the British created an agency that existed for 40 years, and that was essentially an agency that took aerial photography, stereoscopic aerial photography of most Commonwealth countries, and then created mapping for all of those countries. So ultimately, over the 40 years, they surveyed 55 countries in their entirety, and in the process created 1.5 million aerial photographs. And this is just, again, a good example of the power of comparative cover. So this is just one river in eastern Eswatini over the years. And I suppose historically a relatively short period of time, but you can see quite how much change happens so quickly. When we receive this archive from the government, I'll explain very shortly what we've done with it, but because it predates satellite cover by decades, and because it's a survey quality, it has become of interest to climate change researchers because it covers large portions of the Earth's surface long before satellites. And the final collection of photography that we have is commercial air survey photography. So at the same time as we were accessioning photography from the Ministry of Defence, the UK air survey industry, like every other air survey industry in the world, went digital. So the numbers of companies that existed shrank. So we essentially offered a home for companies that wanted to dispose of their archive, and in the process took in about 4.5 million images from the commercial sector. So that was another, for us, a new area of work, because we'd never worked with commercial air survey photography, but it was all destined to be destroyed, so we gave it a home. And that's just an example of one frame from one collection, and you can see the delta shape of Concorde as it's just about to head off to JFK. And this was actually the point in the archive where we actually not only took in the archive from companies, but we typically offered them £1 for their photogrammetric scanners, and almost all of them gave them to us for £1. So we started off with a couple, and now have about 50. And that was for us the kind of the big turning point. So after almost 50 years at the University of Kiel, we essentially outgrew the space that we occupied in the university. Didn't relate to the research or teaching agenda enough, so that was the end of our time at the University of Kiel, and that eventually led to us moving to Edinburgh, and now we're part of a government agency called Historic Environment Scotland. So we're it's fair to say, the odd squad, because everything that the organisation does is relating to listed buildings, scheduled ancient monuments, castles like Edinburgh Castle you can see on the screen, and then you have us with aerial photography of places around the world, but it works. So just to skip through what we do, because we don't get any public funding, income generation is a large activity for us. We now have a new operations centre, we do lots of cataloguing, and we do lots of online as well. So because we get no ring-fenced public funding, as I said earlier, we've always had this need to generate a commercial income, and luckily for us as an archive, and very unusually within the archive community, we do generate an income. And because 10 to 15% of the bombs that were dropped during the Second World War failed to explode, they are still underground, underwater. So we do lots of work, especially in Germany, Austria and the Netherlands. And that's what our customers are looking for. You can see where the bombs have exploded, and you have craters, but you can also see circled in the image anomalies to be investigated. So beyond bomb disposal work, we also do work for broadcast media. We increasingly do area-wide digitisation projects, and we have a website as well. So in 2021, we relocated to a new operations centre. It's the most unglamorous building in the most unglamorous part of Edinburgh, but it is 20,000 square feet, purpose designed for preserving aerial photography and digitising aerial photography. So compared to our old facility, it is heaven, and it's essentially a very large clean room where we can do all our work in anger. Also, equally unattractive is where the archive is housed. We store our archive in a commercial storage facility. We would love that we had a temperature humidity controlled environment, but the sheer size of the archive makes that financially pretty much unaffordable. That said, within this building you have millions of crates of records, and our archive sits right in the centre, so the temperature humidity is the best temperature and humidity that the archive has ever been stored in. So for us, it's a race to digitise the whole archive within the next few decades, so that we have everything in digital format. And that's an example of, in this case, the DOS collection. This was the storage conditions that were deemed appropriate to store that archive before it came to us, so it's been stored in worse conditions. So in terms of the process of digitising, we always go through a preservation process, and like I said, that's the purpose of the building. So we, in the case of paper prints, always humidify the records and repress them before digitisation. And this is ancient technology, but we have a room full of nipping presses that are used to, so we humidify and then press and then have a perfectly flat print. And film brings with it its own problems as well. So one of the problems that we've discovered is that all of the companies that used to supply the air survey industry and governments around the world, of course, no longer exist. So we've now actually had to invest in our own suite of injection molds. So we now manufacture 4 different sizes of film canister. We manufacture film cores, flanges, film winders, you name it. We've had to turn our hand to building all of this because we have a need. We kind of have that economy of scale. So we did that principally for our own purposes, but we do sell to anybody that wants to buy them from us as well. So once the films and the prints have been through preservation, or as part of that process, we always electrostatically clean the film, and we add leaders and trailers. So there's lots of old equipment made by Kodak, which is ancient but is still very valid for our work. This is a photograph of when I got a telephone call one day saying, if you want light tables, go to this warehouse because they're all getting scrapped. And we took about 20 light tables, and all of what you see on the screen was ultimately scrapped, unfortunately. So in terms of imaging, I know that time's progressing. We have a number of different ways of digitizing. We still use humans, so this is a basic manual digitization of a film. We have many automated photogrammetric scanners. We also have, obviously, the challenge of cataloguing the photography. So this is a typical example of a Second World War plot. So the professor in the 1960s, he was given hundreds of thousands of these and boxes of prints, and for this he created a huge card index system which is now digitized, but you can see obviously the footprints of each image, and that's an example of the card system. And these are all just different types of plots. So this is a classic MAPRW plot. So the collection, again, that's here has plots that look just like this. A number of years ago, we invested in fact, just before the pandemic, we finished developing a cataloguing API. So we used to always create centroids for each image, but now create footprints instead. So luckily for us, when the pandemic came, we just matured this software. So when all the staff went home, they actually, in a few months, created footprints for 650,000 images. And the driver for us in doing this was our current website has been out of date pretty much since we launched it a decade ago. So we've actually just literally last week finished a procurement exercise to build our new online platform, and that will depend completely on footprints. Okay, let's get through this. So this is our current website. I'm just realising that my slide is very out of date because none of the numbers add up. So you can look at images, you can look at plots, but as I mentioned, we've now just gone through the procurement for our new website, which will host tens of millions of images ultimately. One of the big problems that we've got now that we're in our new building, we're digitising so much that we're now beyond normal computers. So luckily for us, on our doorstep is the University of Edinburgh International Data Facility, which is a big data project. So we now use their high-performance computers to process all of our data. So I'll just finish, I know that time's progressing, running through a couple of the live partnerships that we have. So since 2016, we've been working in partnership with the US National Archives. So this is the National Archives headquarters just outside Washington, DC. And in the basement of that building, you'll find a mini NCAP. So we have several federal employees that we pay for, and they every day sit digitising Second World War aerial photography, which is disseminated on our website. One of the logics in doing this is that whether a film ended up with the Americans or it ended up with the British is a bit of a lottery. So they have lots of Royal Air Force photography that we don't hold. We hold lots of US Army Air Force photography that they don't hold. So that one of the ideas was, let's just digitise it and disseminate it together and essentially rebuild the archive digitally that used to be at the wartime intelligence units. So this is literally in the basement of that building. And I mentioned earlier how the British captured 1.5 million images from the German Luftwaffe. The Americans had a parallel project called Operation Dick Tracy, and they captured 1.2 million images. But what we've discovered is that amongst what the Americans captured is lots of photography of the UK during the Second World War. So for us, that's obviously of great interest. And just to finish, I mentioned earlier on about how we have the DOS collection, which is the 1.5 million aerial photographs that cover Commonwealth countries. When we got that archive, we worked with academics at the University of Stockholm and the University of California in Berkeley, won some funding to preserve that whole collection and to digitise it. I think I was even possibly talking about this when we were in Paris, but it's actually now happened. So for that project, we got the funding and then had to try and work out how on earth they're going to digitise 1.5 million images. Have I got 2 minutes? Yeah. Nice. So we knew that humans wouldn't be a good idea to use to do this digitisation. So this prompted us to actually automate that entire process. So it has been a vertical learning curve, working with robot specialists, but basically a process that a human used to do, we now have robots doing. So I'll just very quickly show you a video. Basically, when we started this, we were doing hundreds of scans per day. Just last month, we did 60,000 images in that month. And it's been quite a bit of a game changer. I'll just show you the video.
60,000 in a month?
In a month, yeah. Through that.
So 5 robots?
7 now, actually. 7.
7?
Yeah. So this actually shows that we actually, once we've pressed the print, we actually vacuum seal everything so that the prints remain flat. That's why the lady's just opened a vacuum bag.
The scanner are normal linear scanner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In this speech, I'm going to talk about aerial photographs from a different point of view. we will consider the photographs beyond their documentary value, looking at them as material objects. The AerialPhotographic National Archive, AFN, consists of millions of images having a different age, as my director told before, from the end of the 18th century up to nowadays photographs. And on different bases, we have glass plates, negatives, and paper prints, and films on plastic bases, and having different sizes, dimensions. With my colleague Gabriella D'Ippolito, who is a restorer, we've been dealing with the conservation of photographs for years. Besides the well-known features of deterioration we can find on all the photographs, we would like to show you some particular pattern of deterioration. The most common alteration in historical photography are silver mirroring, fragility, and curves. But we would like to show something particular. The following images are taken from AMER RPW collection, and I will ask you to focus on the discoloration and the spots of these photographs. This is not an exercise of photographic chemistry, but these manifestations are actually the consequences of part of the history of these photographs. That's how sometimes, in times of war, photographic laboratories looked like. Maybe that the climatic conditions were too hot, and the reactants were overused or exhausted. Sometimes the only available water was stream water. For a better understanding and an agile visual reference, we're going to show a brief selection of possible damages due to printing error. In this slide, we can see that the photograph has a lack of image in some parts. And we can recognize the specific issue. There is that the damage is due to insufficient fixing of during the process. By comparison with the image at the right, that was printed a few years ago, where it was intentionally reproduced the printing error of a little fixing agent. In the same way, we can recognize that the discoloration is due to insufficient rinsing of the print. Sometimes the hurry in handling the prints or the negatives caused the worker to leave some traces, and we can see in this particular of the photograph the fingerprint. And sometimes a not properly cleaned tool can stick to the photograph. In this case, the sign we can see in this particular photograph is due to the canvas of the dryer that remained on the print. The sign of the canvas that remained on the print. These particular cases of deterioration suggest and testify of a process performed under time pressure, sometimes in the absence of suitable materials and supplies. The deterioration in the previous images are in some way not not aging depending. Of course, they worsen in time, but they were induced at the origin. Now, let's move to another type of deterioration we find in our archives, in particular in negative archives from the Air Force, Italian Air Force, and we have a great number of films on different bases, and many of these are on cellulose acetate base. Specialistic literature reports the so-called vinegar syndrome. That is the most common degradation path of these negatives. And is described as subsequent stages, such as release of gassing of acetic acid, that is the smell of vinegar, and then warping and the formation of bubbles and the crystal of plasticizer. And this is well known and well described in literature. But we've never found in literature anything like this. I'm going to show you. No. No. Okay, I don't know why it runs this way, but you can see that the roll was stuck at the bottom of the canister. I don't know why the format decided to show the film in this way. And by trying to extract it, we noticed that there was a dense mass that drifts off the film roll. We suppose that this particular deterioration occurs in particular condition of our films, because they are still in the form of rolls, and they are from the end of 1950s. They are housed in their original metal cans, and the lid doesn't allow the air to circulate, nor the acetic acid to vent. With Alan Williams, we had fruitful discussions about housing acetate rolls in vented cans. And I take the opportunity now to ask if any of you have had similar experience with acetate films. Okay. Okay, let's go on. Okay. But AFN is not only a collection of damaged photographs. We are an archive that takes care of the collection. We apply preventive conservation measures by rehousing prints, photographic prints from their original non-conservative boxes into new boxes made of cardboard, specially studied for photographic conservation and non-acid. Restoration is also an important activity. In these slides we can see two restorers, Gabriella Di Polito and Barbara Costantini, at work. They are separating two prints that are stuck each other due to mold attack. At the bottom we see the box for removing manually the dust, the dirt and the mold. Proper microclimatic conditions are very important in slowing down the reaction of degradation of the photographs. For this reason, our archives are monitored by a network of thermohygrometric probes that read in real time the climatic conditions in different points of the various archive rooms. By means of these probes, whose data are aggregated and then stored in a server, in a remote server, we know the temperature and the relative humidity of the archives and study the microclimatic behavior of the environment on a daily, monthly, seasonally and yearly basis, because the system has been in operation since 2011. Thanks to this data, it was possible to study and set up an air conditioning plant for managing the thermohygrometric condition room by room. This is an example of the map with the position of some probe and the value read by the probes. Inspecting and monitoring of the state of conservation of the collection is another important activity for conservation. In particular, the monitoring of the acidity released by acetate films allows to distinguish different levels of urgency in the plan for digitization. Here is shown also an entomological trap that is useful for monitoring the archives. Last but not least, the everyday operation of handling the photographs needs precaution, such as the use of gloves, the creation of guidelines and instructions for operators and users. For those interested, a brief visit to the archives will be arranged during the breaks. Thank you for your kind attention.